From 1988 to 1995, In the Heat of the Night brought gripping drama and powerful storytelling to television, exploring life and crime in a small Mississippi town. Inspired by the Oscar-winning film, the series starred Carroll O'Connor as Chief Gillespie and Howard Rollins as Detective Tibbs, creating unforgettable characters that drew millions of viewers each week. With its mix of crime, justice, and social issues, the show became a standout of late 80s and early 90s TV. But decades later, fans still ask, what happened to the cast after the series ended? In 2025, some remained in Hollywood, others pursued new paths, and a few left lasting legacies. Join us as we revisit the In the Heat of the Night cast, then and now. Carroll O'Connor was born on August 2, 1924, and in 1988, at the age of 64, he became Chief William O. Bill Gillespie in the Heat of the Night, a character whose arc from rigid, old-guard Southern cop to a more open-minded and empathetic leader fascinated audiences. Gillespie was gruff, unpredictable, sometimes bigoted, but also capable of surprising tenderness, making him one of television's most complicated lawmen. Yet O'Connor's own childhood was a grinding struggle. Raised in New York by a father whose gambling debts often left the family near ruin, he grew up embarrassed by their financial instability and lashed out at school, masking insecurity with sarcasm. His acting career was anything but smooth. He was rejected dozens of times before breaking through, and even as Archie Bunker made him famous, CBS executives labeled him toxic for constantly fighting over scripts and threatening walkouts. His darkest professional moment came during a public war with studio heads in the 1970s, where he was nearly blacklisted for demanding political storylines, a rebellion that left him branded as arrogant and volatile. His personal life was no less turbulent. His marriage to Nancy Fields endured, but behind closed doors they were scarred by his son, Hugh's spiraling addiction and eventual suicide in 1995, a tragedy that devastated O'Connor and pushed him into bitter court battles with Hugh's dealer. He never fully recovered from the guilt, sinking into bouts of depression while hiding it behind his sharp wit on set. Health issues mounted. Diabetes, heart problems, and depression haunted his later years. And he died on June 21, 2001, at age 76, from a heart attack linked to his illness in Culver City, California. At his death, his estate was worth roughly $20 million, much of it from real estate and Archie Bunker royalties. Yet his fortune could not erase the image of a brilliant actor haunted by grief, bitterness, and the contradictions of a life spent fighting both the system and his own demons. Howard E. Rollins, Jr., born October 17, 1950, in Baltimore, Maryland, was 38 when he assumed the pivotal role of Virgil Tibbs, the cerebral Northern detective whose intellect and calm demeanor often clashed with the entrenched racism and traditions of Sparta, Mississippi. His portrayal brought gravitas and complexity, resonating with audiences who admired Tibbs as both principled and humane. Yet the admiration Rollins earned on screen stood in stark contrast to the chaos of his private life. Raised in a working-class family, Rollins grew up feeling excluded, often mocked for his soft-spoken nature and secret ambitions. The hunger for validation propelled him into acting, where his talent seemed limitless. Oscar-nominated for Ragtime and praised on Broadway. But fame magnified his demons. Cocaine and alcohol became his crutch, leading to several arrests for drug possession and DUI, and ultimately prison time. His clashes with producers were notorious, his absences from set so frequent that by season 6 he was unceremoniously dismissed. co-stars quietly resented his unreliability, though some whispered about his brilliance being squandered by addiction. Perhaps the darkest scandal was his arrest in costume, still wearing his Sparta police badge when booked, a surreal blending of his double life. Failed relationships compounded his misery. He never married, but was known for volatile romances and secret affairs that left him isolated. Diagnosed with lymphoma and later AIDS, Rollins tried to mount a comeback, but found doors closed. His greatest professional collapse was his inability to sustain the credibility he once commanded, his reputation ruined by repeated relapses. On December 8, 1996, at age 46, he died in New York City from complications of AIDS-related lymphoma, leaving behind a legacy both dazzling and tragic. His net worth, estimated at $5 million, included residuals, a New York apartment, and modest savings, much of which was consumed by medical costs and legal battles, ensuring that even in death, his story bore the mark of struggle. Carl Weathers was born on January 14, 1948, and at 45, he became Chief Hampton Forbes in 1993, a commanding and composed leader who breathed new authority into Sparta's police department. On screen, Forbes was a stabilizing force, yet Weathers himself carried a far stormier legacy. Growing up in New Orleans in a working-class family, his childhood was marked by ridicule for his ambition to escape poverty through athletics, forcing him to bury insecurities under layers of discipline. His acting career soared with Apollo Creed in the Rocky films, but success came with chaos. He was infamous for heated clashes with directors, demanding higher billing and rewriting lines to amplify his presence. His biggest professional humiliation came in the 1980s when roles dried up, and he was mocked in Hollywood circles as a has-been athlete trying to act, a wound that haunted him despite later success. Marriages collapsed in bitter divorces. Accusations of infidelity and emotional distance followed him, and one ex-wife publicly accused him of neglect. Friends whispered about his short temper and relentless ego, habits that made collaboration difficult. Personal tragedies compounded his struggles. He lost close family members and wrestled with depression in private, though he masked it with his charismatic smile. His health declined in later years, and although the cause of his death on February 2, 2024, in Los Angeles at 76 was not disclosed, insiders spoke of years of hidden illness. At the time of his passing, his estate was valued at $8 million, including luxury homes, film royalties, and investments. Posthumously honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, his reputation softened, but those who knew him intimately recalled a man as complex and combustible as the roles he played, leaving behind both admiration and unease in equal measure. Lois Nettleton, born August 16, 1927, in Oak Park, Illinois, appeared in the series in 1988 at 61 as Joanne St. John, a nurturing counselor whose grace and empathy balanced the show's grit. To audiences, she was a beacon of compassion, yet Nettleton's real life carried an undercurrent of loneliness and unspoken disappointment. Raised in a home that demanded perfection but gave little affection, she grew up craving approval, masking insecurity with poise. Her career was long and decorated, with daytime Emmys and critical acclaim, but Hollywood insiders recalled her as fiercely ambitious and occasionally ruthless, willing to outmaneuver rivals and undercut younger actresses she saw as threats. She endured humiliating career setbacks, like being fired abruptly from a Broadway revival after clashing with a director, a wound she carried for years. Her brief marriage to writer Jean Shepherd collapsed in bitterness, with private accounts of cruel fights and emotional manipulation that left her deeply mistrustful of men. Though she cultivated an image of refinement, friends admitted she battled depression and loneliness, often numbing herself with cigarettes and alcohol behind closed doors. She lived through heartbreak, including the deaths of close friends and the betrayal of colleagues who exploited her generosity. In her later years, lung cancer consumed her quietly, a tragic irony given her lifelong smoking habit, and she died on January 18, 2008, at age 80 in Woodland Hills, California. Her estate, worth about $2 to $3 million, consisted of royalties, modest savings, and a Los Angeles home. While the industry lauded her artistry, whispers of her sharp temper and guarded nature linger, painting her as both admired and feared. A woman who gave everything to her craft, yet never found the personal peace she so often portrayed on screen. Anne Marie Johnson, born July 18, 1960, in Los Angeles, was only 28 when she first portrayed Althea Tibbs, the compassionate, sharp-witted wife of Virgil Tibbs, whose presence softened the harshness of Sparta's racial tensions. On screen, Althea embodied grace, intelligence, and resilience, capturing the loyalty of fans who admired her strength as a mother and partner. Off-screen, however, Anne Marie's early years were marked by a sense of alienation. Growing up biracial in Los Angeles, she endured cruel teasing about her identity and often buried her emotions behind a polished exterior. Unlike her troubled co-stars, her career trajectory appeared steady, but that stability was hard-won. Hollywood often rejected her for leading roles, typecasting her as either the respectable wife or token intellectual, fueling her frustration. A pivotal career setback came when a high-profile pilot she starred in was abruptly canceled, crushing her confidence and reinforcing industry whispers that she lacked star power. She fought back not with scandal, but with activism, boldly challenging Hollywood's systemic racism and sexism, which sometimes made her unpopular with executives. Colleagues admired her, but also feared her outspokenness, seeing her as both ally and agitator. In her personal life, Anne Marie was no stranger to turbulence. Her relationships before meeting Martin Gray were often short-lived, marred by incompatibility and her own distrust of intimacy. Though her marriage since 1996 has remained private and stable, her decision not to have children sparked tabloid speculation and criticism. She has also endured grief in silence, quietly losing close friends in the industry to drugs and illness, tragedies she rarely discusses publicly. Unlike Rollins or Hugh, she never spiraled into addiction, but she battled depression in secrecy, an invisible weight behind her composed public image. Now, 65 and still active, she divides her time between acting, activism, and serving as a veteran voice in Hollywood labor negotiations. Her net worth, estimated at $4 million, comes from decades of steady work, investments in Los Angeles real estate, and residuals. Alan Autry was born on July 31, 1952, and in 1988, at 36 years old, he became Captain V.L. Bubba Skinner, the towering, hot-headed, yet fiercely loyal officer of Sparta, whose mix of Southern charm and raw intimidation made him both beloved and feared by fans. Skinner's grit gave the show muscle, but Autry's personal life was filled with painful contradictions. As a boy in Shreveport, Louisiana, his family's poverty was so severe that he worked menial jobs from the age of 10, and his classmates mocked his ragged clothes and accent, forcing him into silence that later transformed into a commanding on-screen presence. Before acting, he tasted brief glory as a quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, only to be abruptly cut from the team. a humiliation that shattered his athletic dreams and plunged him into years of financial instability. Hollywood did not embrace him easily either. He was dismissed from early roles as wooden, and rumors swirled about clashes with directors who found his political conservatism abrasive. His biggest career embarrassment came when a much-hyped action pilot he starred in collapsed after a single episode, leaving him publicly ridiculed as a failed leading man. Off-screen, his romantic life was tangled. His first marriage disintegrated amid accusations of neglect and infidelity. And even in his second marriage to Kimberly Autry, tabloids whispered about control issues and political disagreements that nearly split them apart. Known for his fiery temper, he alienated colleagues with religious preaching on set and polarizing comments as the mayor of Fresno, drawing both admiration and outrage. Financially, he was less secure than many assumed, pouring money into failed business ventures and campaigns, leaving him with an estimated net worth of around $3 million as of 2025. Still alive at 73, he maintains a quieter life, but his reputation remains that of a man who could never fully escape the shadow of Bubba Skinner or the controversies he stirred in both Hollywood and politics. Hugh O'Connor was born on April 7, 1962, in Rome, Italy, and at just 26 years old, he stepped into the role of Lieutenant Lonnie Jameson in the Heat of the Night, embodying a calm, steadfast officer who became the emotional glue of the team. Audiences saw him as loyal and compassionate, but behind the camera, Hugh's reality was far from steady. Adopted by Carol O'Connor after a turbulent early life, Hugh struggled with feeling overshadowed by his famous father, often retreating into silence to mask feelings of inadequacy. His battle with Hodgkin's lymphoma during adolescence left scars both physical and psychological, making him vulnerable to addiction. Drugs soon became a hidden force in his life, undermining his career and fracturing his personal relationships. He endured stints in rehab, promises of recovery, and devastating relapses, all while trying to keep up with the demands of the show. His greatest professional collapse came when his addiction led to erratic behavior on set, straining even Carol's patience and forcing production to quietly cover his lapses. Though married to Angela Clayton, Hugh's marriage was riddled with tension, her pleas for stability drowned out by his dependency. Carol's fierce protection created further controversy, as crew members whispered about favoritism and Hugh's inability to withstand the pressure of expectation. The breaking point arrived on March 28, 1995, when Hugh, overwhelmed by drugs and depression, shot himself at age 32 in Pacific Palisades, California. His death not only left Hollywood shaken, but also drove Carol to launch a public war on drug dealers, resulting in the Drug Dealer Liability Act. At the time, Hugh's estate was valued at around $1.2 million, including royalties, a modest home, and investments arranged by his father, an inheritance that, tragically, he would never live to stabilize or expand. Crystal Fox, born January 1, 1964, joined In the Heat of the Night in 1989 at 25 as Officer Luann Corbin, a role that positioned her as one of the few women in uniform in Sparta's male-dominated police department. Luann's empathy, emotional depth, and quiet strength made her an audience favorite, her presence often softening the show's grim tone and giving the narrative a moral counterweight. Yet Crystal's own early life in North Carolina was marked by turbulence. Her family was deeply fractured, her father absent, and her famous Aunt Nina Simone's towering legacy often cast a shadow that left her feeling inadequate. Schoolmates taunted her for being related to a controversial star, and she learned to hide her insecurities beneath discipline and drive. Acting became her refuge, but her career was riddled with hardship. Despite her breakout in Heat, Fox spent years scraping together guest roles, often overlooked in favor of lighter-skinned actresses in an industry notorious for colorism. Industry whispers suggested she was too intense for sitcoms and too refined for urban dramas, leaving her stuck in a limbo of underappreciation. The lowest blow came in the mid-2000s when she was quietly cut from a pilot she'd been promised. A decision she later revealed was based not on her performance, but studio executives doubting her marketability. Personally, she endured unstable romances, one of which ended with restraining orders after a partner allegedly harassed her post-breakup. She never married, choosing solitude and her craft over traditional family life, though that choice was fueled partly by mistrust from betrayal. Over time, Fox clawed her way back, starring in The Haves and the Have-Nots, and then Big Little Lies, finally gaining critical respect she had been denied for decades. Now 61, she keeps her private life heavily guarded, living quietly in Georgia, with an estate valued around $4 million from TV contracts and syndication checks. Fox remains proof of resilience, though behind the applause lies a history of wounds she rarely allows anyone to see. Geoffrey Thorne, born January 20, 1970, took on the role of Sergeant Wilson Sweet in 1988 at the age of 18, the youngest officer in the Sparta Police Department, and a character caught between his ambition and the racial tensions that defined both the show and the South it depicted. Sweet was eager, vulnerable, often more principled than his superiors, and audiences sympathized with his struggles as he stood up against corruption while trying to be accepted as a black officer in a mostly white force. Off-screen, however, Thorne's own life was less orderly. Raised in Washington, D.C., in a fractured household where his father left early and his mother struggled with poverty, Geoffrey spent much of his youth retreating into books and comics to escape ridicule from peers who mocked his clothes and stammer. Acting gave him an escape, but the fame from In the Heat of the Night proved a double-edged sword. He was typecast as the young black cop, and when the series ended, work dried up. He admitted in later interviews that producers blacklisted him for being outspoken, claiming he resisted stereotypical roles, and sometimes clashed with directors over racial authenticity. His lowest point came when he lost out on a major recurring role in a Star Trek series because of backstage politics, an opportunity he later described as, "The moment I realized Hollywood was a rigged game." Relationships suffered too. He cycled through short romances, unable to commit, partly from the distrust he carried from his childhood. But Thorne reinvented himself, pouring his anger into writing, crafting acclaimed scripts for Star Trek, The Next Generation tie-ins, and later major comic franchises. Now 55, he lives a quieter life in Los Angeles, a respected but sharp-tongued figure in speculative fiction with a net worth around $2 to $3 million from royalties, comics, and TV writing. He built wealth cautiously, unlike peers who squandered it, ensuring his legacy now rests not on the role that once trapped him, but on the stories he later took control of telling. Wilbur Fitzgerald was born on September 15, 1948, and in 1989, at 40, he stepped into the role of District Attorney Gerard Darnell, a man whose sharp intellect and legal maneuvering often placed him in direct opposition to Sparta's lawmen. Darnell was cunning, politically savvy, and unafraid to manipulate the system. And while audiences saw him as a polished antagonist, Fitzgerald's own past was far less tidy. Raised in Georgia, his early life was marred by an absent father and a mother who scraped by on menial jobs. Classmates mocked his stutter, and he developed an iron mask of composure to hide his shame. As an actor, he endured years of rejection and ridicule, with casting directors labeling him forgettable, until he carved out a niche as the slick bureaucrat type. But beneath his professional image were stories of friction. On sets, some accused him of arrogance, and fellow actors quietly shared how he flaunted his real-life attorney status to intimidate producers into rewriting scripts. His most humiliating failure came when he lobbied aggressively for a starring role in a primetime legal drama only to be publicly rejected, leaving him blacklisted from several networks. In private, Fitzgerald's life was turbulent. His marriage endured infidelity rumors, and insiders claimed his obsession with control strained his relationships. He battled a quiet gambling addiction in the 1990s, with debts that nearly cost him his law license when creditors began circling. The deaths of close family members left him withdrawn, and his double life, splitting time between the courtroom and Hollywood, strained his health and spirit. Still alive at 76, Fitzgerald maintains a quiet life in Georgia, practicing law selectively while making rare screen appearances. His estate, a mix of real estate, legal earnings, and residuals, is estimated between $1 to $2 million, though colleagues whisper he hides more in offshore accounts. A final twist befitting a man who always blurred the lines between role and reality. Karen Carlson, born January 15, 1945, in Shreveport, Louisiana, stepped into the role of Sarah Hallisey in 1990 at age 45, portraying a polished, principled woman who fought to uphold morality in a town rife with tension. On screen, she was poised and authoritative, but Carlson's off-screen journey was riddled with contradiction and turmoil. As a young beauty queen, she entered Hollywood with glamour but quickly found herself ensnared in its darker undercurrents, casting couches, lecherous producers, and roles that reduced her to ornaments. Childhood insecurities, born from a strict Southern upbringing where emotional vulnerability was mocked, fueled her relentless drive, yet also made her vulnerable to manipulation. Her marriage to David Soul, already notorious for his volatile temper, was a storm of jealousy, accusations, and public fights. Their divorce left her emotionally battered and financially strained. Her second marriage to musician Devin Payne brought 3 children, but also chaos, as whispers of infidelity, substance abuse, and screaming arguments dogged the relationship. Career setbacks piled up, most devastatingly when she was dropped last minute from a lucrative primetime role, replaced by an actress half her age, a rejection that crushed her confidence. Though not marred by public scandal, Carlson was infamous in some circles for her sharp tongue and refusal to play nice, traits that left her quietly blacklisted from certain studios. Yet she proved unexpectedly shrewd with investments, buying property in Los Angeles and leveraging early paychecks into real estate deals that ballooned in value. By the time she retired into seclusion, she had amassed a staggering net worth of about $46 million, a fortune far beyond her acting salary, shocking peers who assumed she had faded into obscurity. Now in her late 70s, Carlson lives quietly, removed from Hollywood's spotlight, remembered not only for her grace on screen, but also for her survival instincts, a woman who turned personal chaos into financial triumph, even as whispers of her past betrayals and heartbreak continue to shadow her legacy. David Hart was born on February 6, 1954, and in 1988, at the age of 34, he joined the cast as Officer Parker Williams, a kind, soft-spoken policeman whose sensitivity and moral grounding often set him apart from the hardened men around him. Parker was beloved by viewers as the conscience of the department, But Hart's own upbringing was far harsher. Growing up in Marianna, Florida, he was teased mercilessly for his slight build and shy manner, hiding behind humor to cope with the cruelty of peers and the coldness of a distant father. His acting career was a slow grind through bit parts, and he was once fired from a stage production after being accused of lacking stage presence, a humiliation that nearly made him quit. Though spared the massive scandals that plagued some of his peers, whispers followed him, stories of on-set mood swings, a gambling habit in his 40s that drained savings, and bitterness over being overlooked for bigger roles. His greatest professional failure came after the end of In the Heat of the Night, when attempts to land leading parts in primetime dramas fell flat, reducing him to guest appearances and voice work that barely paid the bills. His personal life was complicated. Though married to Ann Tabor since 1998, his earlier relationships were marred by jealousy and distance, and some insiders suggested estrangement from his children, including comedian Mamrie Hart, who rarely referenced her father publicly in her rise to internet fame. In later years, Hart faced both financial strain and health scares, including rumors of heart trouble that curtailed his touring as a singer. Still alive in 2025 at age 71, he lives modestly, his net worth hovering around $500,000, much of it tied to theater work and residuals, a far cry from the millions earned by co-stars. Though remembered fondly as the gentle Parker Williams, his legacy carries the undertone of a man whose soft public image masked years of rejection, addiction to risk, and lingering bitterness about a career that never quite gave him the recognition he craved. Denise Nicholas, born July 12, 1944, stepped into In the Heat of the Night in 1988 at 44 as Harriet DeLong, the city councilwoman whose sharp wit and fearless resolve made her a match for Carroll O'Connor's Chief Gillespie, both politically and romantically. Harriet became an icon of strength and independence on television, a rare depiction of a black woman wielding power with both charm and tenacity. Nicholas's own life, however, mirrored turbulence more than triumph. Raised in Detroit in a home strained by her parents' divorce, Denise was ridiculed in childhood for her stutter and dark complexion, often hiding in books while suppressing her emotions. Acting liberated her, but her career was fraught with setbacks. She faced typecasting after Room 222, and her activism during the civil rights movement branded her difficult to work with. The most notorious scandal came from her short-lived marriage to soul legend Bill Withers, which collapsed amid accusations of abuse and volatile arguments that spilled into public gossip columns. Nicholas later described it as one of the darkest chapters of her life. She endured 2 more failed marriages, and whispers of on-set confrontations with O'Connor himself circulated during Heat's later seasons, with rumors she considered quitting altogether after one particularly bitter feud over dialogue. Her personal grief deepened when her sister Michelle was murdered in 1980, a trauma that haunted her through her career. Though she persevered, the pain etched itself into her performances. By the early 2000s, Nicholas retired from acting, shifting to writing where she found solace, publishing her acclaimed novel Freshwater Road, though publishers initially doubted her ability to succeed as an author. Now, 81, she lives quietly in California, her fortune estimated at $3 million from decades in TV, royalties, and book sales. Her wealth is comfortable, but her real legacy is one of survival. A woman who endured heartbreak, public scandal, and private grief, yet managed to reshape her voice into one that could not be silenced. Thank you for joining us on this nostalgic journey through classic television history. If you enjoyed learning about the cast of In the Heat of the Night and where they are now, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more vintage Hollywood retrospectives, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your memories and suggestions, so let us know which TV show or movie cast you'd like us to feature next.